When I was a kid, the very first concert I ever went to was a Garth Brooks concert. I have such a soft spot for so many of those old 90s country songs that bring me right back to those days of my youth. I was scanning stations on my car radio the other day, and I actually landed on one of those oldies called Unanswered Prayers. It tells the story of a man who crosses paths with what he calls his high school flame, and he remembers, quote, each night praying God would make her mine. Well, it didn't happen. The man went on to marry somebody else. But in that moment crossing paths with her again, he suddenly recognizes what a gift God gave him in the woman he did marry. He sings in the chorus, remember, when you're talking to the man upstairs, that just because he doesn't answer doesn't mean he don't care. Some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers. It can be truly difficult when we don't get our prayers answered. But sometimes, as told in the story of this song, it is perhaps best that we don't. There is some truth to those lyrics. We don't always get it right when we ask God for things. James, the brother of Jesus, said, you ask and don't receive because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your own pleasures. James 4:3. One reason we don't get our prayers answered is because we're asking from a selfish motivation. You can't hide the motives of your heart from a God who can see through you, all the way through you to your heart, your innermost private thoughts. Nobody yet has figured out how to hide from God. You just can't do it. So if you ask amiss, he will know. We have to stop asking God for things according to any selfish desires and appetites and ask instead according to his desire, his will. Because if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And if we know that he hears whatever we ask, we know that we have what we have asked of him. That's 1 John 5:14 and 15. Oftentimes we ask and we aren't sure. We lack the confidence that he's even hearing us. But John says this is the confidence we have before him. We just need to ask according to his will and not our own. Even Jesus said in his own prayers in the Garden of Gethsemane, not as I will, but as you will. Matthew 26:39. When we don't see answers to prayers before we get too discouraged, maybe, just maybe, we should reflect on the matters of our own heart. Perhaps we're asking from wrong motives or for something against his will, or, perhaps there is something else going on. Another barrier to answered prayer is sin. In defending Jesus to his fiercest critics, a man healed of blindness said, we know that God doesn't listen to sinners. But if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he listens to him. John 9:31. This is stated other ways in the Bible, but I appreciate the clarity here in the Gospel of John. God doesn't listen to sinners. So if you're sinning, and don't worry, we all have sinned, then it's just a matter of confessing the sin and being forgiven by our faithful God, who is righteous in forgiving you. Don't ever let any sin stand in your way or prevent you from getting answered prayers. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and righteous to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. That's 1 John 1:9. If sin is indeed hindering prayers, then confess it, get cleansed and forgiven, and get your prayers answered. This is what Nehemiah did for himself and his family and the whole nation of Israel, really. And after he did, God answered a very specific prayer for him. Hear how he starts his prayer. Lord, the God of heavens, the great and awe-inspiring God who keeps his gracious covenant with those who love him and keep his commands, let your eyes be open and your ears be attentive to hear your servant's prayer. Then I now pray to you day and night for your servants, the Israelites. I confess the sins we have committed against you. Both I and my father's family have sinned. We have acted corruptly toward you and have not kept the commands, statutes, and ordinances you gave your servant Moses. Nehemiah, who shows himself to be quite a praying man, starts his prayer by confessing his sin, the sins of his family, the sins of his nation. Then at the end, he makes his request known. He prays, "Give your servant success today and grant him compassion in the presence of this man," referring to the Persian king. Why did Nehemiah pray this way? Why would he lead with a confession of his sins? Again, as the formerly blind man said, God doesn't listen to sinners. Nehemiah got himself right with God, and his motives were pure in the Lord's eyes, and therefore his prayers were answered. Imagine if you knew God would hear you. Imagine if you knew you would have what you ask of him. The Bible is telling us how we ought to pray to God, and if we are willing to listen, that we don't have to imagine it. We can just walk in the same powerful prayer life of the righteous men and women who went on before us. This isn't all the Bible has to say on prayer, and I encourage you to seek out further truth on this matter from the Scriptures.